Good afternoon, folks. Welcome once again to another of these J by J Artist Talks. My name again is Seth Kibel, and I will introduce our special guest in just a few minutes. But first, I want to make a few important announcements. First of all, as always, if you are watching this live, and if you're watching it live, look at your clock right now. If you're on the East Coast, it should say 5 p.m., and it should be, what is today? Wednesday, December 9th. So if those facts are true, you are watching it live, which means you can contribute questions to us live. Now, if you're watching us in the Zoom webinar format, we cannot see you, we cannot hear you. Nonetheless, you can avail yourself of Zoom's Q&A feature. It varies a bit device to device, but you scroll your cursor, your mouse, your finger, whatever, to the top or bottom of your screen. That little magic menu bar should pop up, and one of the buttons in that menu bar says Q&A. That stands for question and answer. You go into that box, type the questions, we'll provide the answers. But seriously, go ahead and avail yourself of that. We may not see what you type in real time, but I promise you at several points during today's presentation, I will inspect that Q&A box and relay any questions you might have to Susan Jones, our special guest. And if you're watching on the Eventive platform, they also have a chat function. You can type the questions in the chat window there, and J by J Communication Director Alexis Rodriguez is monitoring that chat window and will pass along any questions to us here. All right, finally, we are here, of course, because this week, going all the way through tomorrow evening, is this year's virtual J by J Festival, combination Washington Jewish Film Festival and Washington Jewish Music Festival. And if you haven't done so already, the minute we're done with this chat, you gotta scroll your browser over to jbyjdc.org. That's jxjdc.org, where you can find all the incredible offerings this festival has to offer. Over 40 films, about a dozen unique musical performances, and there's lots of great ways to watch them. If you purchase the All Access Pass, if you go up here, hey, who's that guy? If you go up here to a festival, go down to the Tickets and Passes tab, probably the best thing to do is you can purchase the All Access Pass for $90. That lets you watch anything and everything the festival has to offer anytime you want through 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. So you can postpone finishing The Queen's Gambit. That'll still be on Netflix at the end of the month. Now, if you prefer more of an a la carte approach, you can purchase single tickets for events, and it's pay as you go, or pay what you want type of thing. There's a little service fee, but that's about it. So it's literally for the price of a cup of coffee, you can watch individual events. Now, if you go to the music tab here, look at all these great musical performances. But the two we're going to be talking about today is Jazz Night at J by J, featuring an all-star conglomeration of Washington, D.C.'s best, mostly Jewish jazz musicians. And then this set, the Klezmer, with special guest Susan Jones. So that is a perfect segue for me to officially welcome to the talk superlative, multi-talented violinist, whoops, let me do this properly, Susan Jones. Susan!
Hi.
Welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
So look, Susan is part of not one, but a featured performer in two of the virtual J by J sets. She's part of the Jazz Night set, which, by the way, Sue, I think is kind of a misnomer because I watched it at 9 a.m. this morning.
Good anytime.
And then you're also part of the Klezmer set. Now, normally the Klezmer would be featuring this guy, but for this virtual performance, you replaced me, as unfortunately I am currently under house arrest. So Sue, I'd love to talk about these sets a bit, as well as talk about your background and talk about a lot of different things. But let's start with the Jazz Night set. This was really an all-star group. It was you on violin, Harry Appleman on piano, Michael Reitzik on guitar, Bob Abbott on double bass, and then Julian Berkowitz on drums. Now, look, I know you've worked with all those people at some point or another, right?
Most of them.
Okay, well, that leads perfectly to my next question. But I'm guessing that exact conglomeration of musicians has never played together until you were together in that studio performing. Am I right about that?
You got that right. That was our world premiere in that format.
Well, that's amazing. That's a testament to all of your respective skills as musicians because it sounds seamless. You'd think you guys have been playing together for years, but I think that's one of the things really good jazz musicians do. They have a common language and they're able to come together and communicate musically on the bandstand with a surprisingly little amount of pre-planning and rehearsing. Do you want to say a few words about that and how that set came together?
Well, I, of course, made the set list. I sent it to everybody ahead of time and I sent them the charts. And so we were all playing the same song in the same key with the same changes. That's a good place to start. We got there a little bit early so that we could discuss like endings or who was going to play the intro to different tunes. And other than that, that was all the rehearsal we had.
Wow,
and then
fantastic.
bam, we were on. So the rest you just have to listen. And I'm not a great conductor, but I try to lead with my instrument. You do too, but except different instrument, same idea.
Excellent. And you put together a really nice, varied set list of songs by mostly Jewish
All
composers.
Jewish composers, as
All
far
Jewish
as I could
composers.
tell.
My goodness. And there were some really familiar tunes. I don't want to give away too much, but there were some really familiar tunes and then some really obscure ones as well that I hadn't heard as well. How did you come up with the set list? Was it a collaborative effort? What was the thought process?
Well, at first I was mostly going to have like Gershwin and Irving Berlin. And I thought, well, there's so many Jewish American composers that are just great composers. I kind of put the suggestion out there, and Harry was the one who probably came up with a lot of the suggestions. He suggested, I'm trying to remember now what we played. Emily was kind of a mutual agreement. We wanted something that was an odd time.
Ah, yes, Emily, beautiful tune. Johnny Mercer and Johnny Mandel composition. You guys played it beautifully.
And Johnny Mandel, I had a list, I Googled it, a list of Jewish American songwriters. And I got a lot of ideas from that. But of course, Harold Arlen, had written so many great tunes. We did
Chaim Arluk.
What?
Chaim Arluk.
Chaim Arluk.
Yeah. As he was born. But yes, you do Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, right?
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
It was either that or Let's Fall in Love. And I got tired of playing that. It's one of my CDs. So I thought, let's do something different.
One of the tunes that I had never heard before, and I had never heard of the songwriter either, was that Swinging Shepherd Blues by a guy named Mo Kaufman.
Greenberg. Yeah. Well, what happened? I had made a copy of Summertime out of the real book, and that was on the bottom of the page. And I played through it. I thought, man, that'd be pretty groovy. I've heard it before.
Wait, who's Zoom bombing us?
That's Mr. Fuzzy.
Oh,
he got in the. See, I wish he'd come back. He's cute. But in any case, it was on the bottom of the page, and I played it and thought, now that'd be fun to jam out on. And with a name like that, he's got to be Jewish.
Yeah,
but he's so obscure that I couldn't find him on the list.
I had to look him up. Saxophonist, apparently.
He's a what?
A saxophonist.
Oh, okay. Imagine that. Yeah.
That was a great song. And then another one that was a little more obscure. I know the song "A Kiss to Build a Dream On." I mean, that's a beautiful standard. But Harry Ruby's more of an obscure songwriter. I didn't know anything about him. I'd never heard his name before.
Well, actually, Harry Appleman suggested that one. And he said, he didn't know if Harry Ruby was Jewish, but he said with a name like that, come on. But he was on the list. Mm-hmm. So I guess he must be unobscure enough that they had him listed. Another probably obscure tune was I'll Never Be the Same.
Mm,
And I had first learned that when I did a Stefan Grappelli tribute at Blues Alley, because I heard Grappelli play it.
sure.
And it's a gorgeous tune. And when I researched it, um, the guy's name who wrote it was Matty Malnick, which sounds pretty Jewish to me. And
I think.
one of the other songwriters, maybe the lyricist, was Gus Kahn,
Mm-hmm.
and some other guy Signori, but I don't think he's Jewish. But we didn't play that part up.
And look, some of the other things that were really noteworthy about your jazz set is, first of all, the audio and video quality was just pristine. Now, my understanding is you filmed it at Blue House Productions in Kensington, Maryland.
That we did, and
Yeah,
he
and Jeff
added.
Gruber, the engineer there, has been doing loads of broadcasts and recordings during the quarantine. I mean, it was really just a high quality filmed experience.
Mhm.
And yet it looked like you guys had enough distance. You were all wearing masks. There was some plexiglass up. It looked like it was a socially responsible filming experience as well.
Yeah, now the jazz one was good because we were the first ones there that day, so there was no other bands aerosols in the air, you might say, and everybody kept their masks on, including Jeff. When we did the one for the Klezmer, Sean kept feeling like in order to be audible speaking, he should remove his mask. So I insisted on plexiglass between me and Sean. I mean, don't you usually want plexiglass between you and Sean
Well, yeah,
anyway?
yeah,
I
even
mean,
before
yeah,
the pandemic. Yeah,
exactly,
definitely.
exactly. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, that was great. We'll get to the set in a minute, but let's keep talking about jazz a little longer. So now, you have many different skill sets, but in the jazz night at J by J set, you are a jazz violinist.
Hmm.
Now, jazz violin is not unheard of, but it's certainly more of an unusual instrument to hear in jazz. What drove you to become a jazz violinist, and who are your influences along those lines?
Well, somewhere when I was probably maybe in my early 20s, I heard an album. It was a double album. It was half Stefan Grappelli and half Jean Luc Ponty.
Hmm.
And when I heard that, it just really touched me. I mean, when Grappelli plays, he just like exudes such joy. You could find out World War III was breaking out, but you'd still have a smile on your face while he's playing.
Were you already playing violin at that point?
Oh yeah, and I had already started to some degree improvising, but it was mostly more like blues and rock. When I was a teenager, my dad started losing his eyesight, and the condition he had was hereditary. So I didn't want to lose my ability to play music if I couldn't see. So that's when I
Wow.
started learning tunes and stuff like that. And when I did that, I discovered that I had the ability to improvise, and a lot of string players don't.
Yeah.
So, and then I'm married to a drummer. So, I'm used to hearing other kinds of music, particularly jazz, around the house. And there's also that rhythmic influence.
Hmm.
So, all
All
of those
right.
things influence me.
Now, someone has piped in on the Zoom Q&A, and they want to know where they can hear. Oh, she says, I loved this concert. Is it possible to buy a recording of it? Well, you can watch the concert as many times as you like during the duration of the J by J festival. Now, beyond that, I think it's going to probably disappear into the internet ether, at least for the immediate future. But this is a good time to mention that Sue Jones does have a whole bunch of wonderful recordings out, mostly featuring her jazz violin playing. Now, is it correct that the best place for people to go to find out more about your albums is your website, Sue?
Correct. It's
Yeah, now I
violindreams.com.
always want to say Violent Dreams, but it's not.
Yeah,
It's
no, yeah.
violentdreams.com. And here, I'm going to show everyone what that looks like right now. There it is, and there's Susan taking a nap with her violin. And let's see, oh, there I click enter,
Uh-huh.
And oh, you've got these CDs. Okay. That's Christmas in St. Michael's. That's good.
I just
Exit
made that one.
19. Violin Caliente. Oh, that's a great one. Nuts and Bolts with, wait a minute, who's that? Seth Kibel?
Have you
Interesting.
ever heard of him?
Never heard of him. I gotta say, I was very flattered because one of the tunes you played in the jazz set, in fact, the final tune, was a composition of mine.
Yes.
Uh, J by J. When I first saw that you guys were doing that, I thought, uh-oh, I gotta wait and see how they play this. Like, if they don't do a good job, I might have to send one of those like cease and desist orders. But no, it was wonderful. I was really flattered. Thank you so
I'm glad you approved of our rendition
much.
because, I had presumed that Bob knew it pretty well because he's played with the Klezmer. And anyhow, he had never played it before either. So I was the only one in the band who had played it before, but I sent everybody that tune in an MP3 link. So they got to hear it at least, and people did their homework. They listened to it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
So
it's a
again,
great
we've been
tune.
talking about the J by J Jazz Night set, which is kind of an all-star group of mostly Jewish Washington area jazz musicians. It was Sue Jones out front, who we're talking to right now on violin, Harry Appleman on piano, Michael Reitzik from my adopted hometown of Baltimore, Maryland on guitar, Bob Abbott on bass, or as Sue kept on referring to him as Bob Abbottstein, and then Julian Berkowitz on drums. You know, I've worked with all those guys. Of that group, I haven't worked with Julian as much. I've met him before, and I think we've played together at a jam session, but he sounded fantastic, a very tasteful drummer.
Yeah, he did fine. He did good.
And I would imagine, I mean, you're married to a drummer, so you probably know what this is like. I would imagine as a violinist, you're probably always a little apprehensive of drummers because you're playing, no offense, one of the quietest instruments in jazz, and drums, of course, would be one of the loudest instruments in jazz. But it seemed like you guys were meshing together very well during that set.
Well, Jeff Gruber, the engineer at Blue House, has a lot to do with that. He made
That's
sure
true.
everybody was heard right, and the balance was good, and we could all hear each other. So they got to credit that to him.
Excellent. And then the other set you were featured with was the Kleztet with special guest Susan Jones. Now, again, normally the person in front of the Kleztet is this guy. But you know, I couldn't be there because, like I said, I'm under house arrest. That ankle bracelet is really starting to chafe down there. But the Kleztet still wanted to perform as part of this festival, so I put my head together with them, and we came up with the idea: why don't we have Sue take my place? Which is perfect because I mean, it's hard to tell on Zoom, but Sue and I are pretty close to being the same size. We're pretty much the exact same height. Well, you know, we've joked on gigs that we could probably switch clothes during a set break and people would be none the wiser. But anyway, you did a fantastic job of filling my shoes. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks for asking me.
And the Kleztet's set, in addition to Susan Jones, included Sean Lane on piano, great friend of mine, great pianist who lives down near Annapolis. Once again, Bob Abbott back on the double bass, and then a great drummer from Alexandria, Virginia, Tim Jarvis. And one of the things I loved about the set you guys put together is it was a real mix of some traditional klezmer. There were some Yiddish tunes, you know, Yiddish classics like Rosenkis mit Mandlin, Yiddish Mama, Mein Shtetl Bells, and then a fair number of tunes that would fall under the category of Jewish jazz, so to speak. Stuff like Bei mir bist du schön, Be Gesund. You did a pair of great tunes by one of my favorite composers, Kurt Weill. How did this set list?
Well, actually, Sean gets
Yeah.
credit for that. He made that set list, but he asked me for a few suggestions. So some of the Freilachs, I contributed those.
Excellent. And I got to say, you guys went above and beyond because most of the J by J sets are around an hour and change. But you guys did over an hour and a half. It's like an hour 33 minutes. It's great, and it's like a bonus. It's great. It's like you guys played the encores you knew you would get if there was a live audience in there with you.
Yeah.
Now, is it hard? I mean, speaking about that, is it hard to kind of summon up the energy to play some of this music, which is, of course, very emotive. A lot of it's very energetic without an audience there?
Well, it's always a little weird to play, and you have no idea whether the people in the audience are into it or not because they're not there. You just have to presume that they'd be into it. Presume they're doing a horror in their living room while they're listening to it, you know.
Yeah. Um, and now let me ask you this question. I've had this discussion with many people, and we've played in addition to a lot of jazz together. We've played a fair amount of klezmer together. So let me ask you your objective, unbiased opinion. Which is the more important instrument in klezmer music, the violin or the clarinet?
That's,
Wrong.
I
Oh,
would,
sorry. Go ahead.
of course, I would have to say the violin, but the clarinet's important too.
Yes. Well, if I can put my music history professor hat on, I would have to say that it is true for hundreds and hundreds of years that the violin was clearly the dominant instrument in klezmer. I mean, going back hundreds of years in Eastern Europe. And it wasn't really until the very end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century that the clarinet came into the picture. Now, the clarinet, for a brief spell in New York at the dawn of the 20th century, dominated this music and didn't join the violin, but supplanted it as the primary instrument because it could do pretty much everything a violin could musically, but at a much louder volume, which in the days before amplification was a huge asset. And I know you know from personal experience, Sue, that the clarinet can be a lot louder than the violin.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, now in the klezmer revival, that's not really an issue anymore because you can be amplified. We can equalize all those volumes. So I'd say these days, the clarinet and the violin are still pretty much on equal footing.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah.
And again, you guys flattered me by playing a couple of my tunes, songs that I wrote as part of the klezmer set. That was a great thrill. Thank you so much. And then there were some more unusual tunes that you played that I really enjoyed. Like, for example, Midnight in Moscow or Moscow Nights, a Russian tune which became an American jazz standard. Had you played that before, or did you learn that for the Kleztet set?
I know that tune.
Yeah.
I ended up doing it in a different key, but that I knew the tune, so it was not really an issue.
Excellent. And then you guys did a kind of an obscure Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn composition from the Far East Suite called Mount Harissa.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. And it was a great way, you're someone with a very diverse musical background, and it's nice to hear you kind of combine those klezmer and jazz influences you have in the same repertoire. In fact, that's a perfect segue. If you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about your background.
Okay.
So first of all, you are not originally from the Washington, D.C. area, correct?
Correct. I was born in the Bronx. I grew up in Baltimore, at least as much as I did grow up. And then I went to University of Maryland, and I've lived in College Park ever since.
Wow. Now, did you come from a musical family?
Well, yes and no. Um, my mom played the piano. My dad played the radio. But I have cousins. My mom's brother, Paul, both of his kids were professional musicians. My cousin Louise is a professional violist, top tier quality in New York City, and her brother Stuart
I'm
is
sorry,
like,
isn't professional violist an oxymoron?
not in her case, but yeah,
Oh, sorry,
normally
I'm
it
just
would
kidding.
be.
I'm just
It
kidding. Go on,
normally
go
would
on.
be. And Stuart was actually like awesomely talented, but he decided he should have a real job. But just as a hobby, he played, and he played violin and bass and sometimes piano with Jonathan Edwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, some hobby.
And when did you first start playing music? Was violin your first instrument?
I tried to learn piano as a kid, but I got my hands mixed up.
Ah,
And in the fourth grade, they gave you this test to see if you had the aptitude to play an instrument. And I guess I must have done pretty well because they sent a note home to my mom that I should play an instrument. And I wanted to play the flute because it was light to carry, but my mom hated the flute, so I played the violin.
violin's not that much heavier. I mean, maybe a
Nah,
little
it's
bit
not that
heavier.
heavy. And a little did I know that if you play the flute, then you end up bringing the PA. So, the
Yeah,
PA
there you
is
go.
heavier than the amp, so that I have to bring. So it works out.
And initially, my understanding, you were classically trained,
Yeah, yeah.
and you
And
still play classical music. I
I
mean, right?
do. I just try not to let it get in my way too much.
You do string quartet gigs and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I've seen you do that.
Although nowadays the brides, like if they hire a string quartet, they want us to play rock and roll tunes. So I have like tons of arrangements of rock tunes from all eras. Some of them I wrote, some of them I bought, some of
There you
them
go.
I
You've never
swapped.
lived until you've heard Uptown Funk played by a string quartet.
There you go.
Excellent. Okay, so you already talked a little bit about how you discovered jazz and how you got into that. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how you discovered klezmer music. Did you hear klezmer music growing up in the Bronx and Baltimore, or is it something you came to later?
I think I must have heard it in my background because when the time came to play it, and I'm not sure how exactly I got hooked up with it, but I do remember being the substitute violinist in Locks and Vodka.
Mm.
And I think that, and at that point, their bass player, Jay McCrensky, wanted to start his own klezmer band, which was Mahaya. So I played with them for many years.
And that's how I first met you.
Yeah, you were filling in. You were probably like 23, but you looked like you were 13 and you came up to play. And I thought you were the bar mitzvah boy sitting in until I heard you play.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, actually, not to interrupt you, I think I want to tell, I think you've heard me tell the story before. Have I told you the story about when I first met you, Sue?
You said that you passed me on the
Yeah,
road or you cut
I
me
cut
off or
you
something.
off. It was so I had been called to sub with this band and I was new in the area and very green, and I was running a little late and I was nervous because you don't want to be late, the first time you're working with a band, you want to make a good impression. So I wasn't that familiar with the DC roads. So I think I was coming off the Beltway on Connecticut Avenue. I think it was Connecticut Avenue.
Yeah, it was.
And I was really kind of like, you know, getting some speed going.
I'm telling the guy in the background to shut up.
So I really kind of hustled and I put the gas on and I cut off some poor woman in her car merging onto Connecticut Avenue. And I remember thinking to myself as I did that, I'm like, oh, that was a real jerk move. I try not to be that kind of driver, but I knew as I did it, I'm like, and I could see, I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw someone kind of go like this. And I thought, oh, that was kind of a lousy thing for me to do. Anyway, I get to the gig and like right after me, in walks Sue with her violin case, and I realized, oh my God, that's the woman I cut off. I couldn't tell at first if you knew that I was the person who cut you off. Like I was trying to read your look. Like, does she know that I'm that jerk? And I waffled. I had this little debate in my head, like, do I say anything? So I finally went up to you and I said, oh, I'm really sorry for cutting you off, back there. I was in a rush and I realized that was kind of a jerk thing to do. And you said, oh, was that you? I had no idea. At which point I was really mad at myself. I'm like, you idiot, you could have just kept your mouth shut.
Yeah, I had no idea it was you. But what you told me that day was that you were listening to our recording to study for the gig, and
That's
you were
true.
so taken aback by the violin playing
Yes.
that's why you did it. You didn't realize you were cutting me off.
So anyway, so you first learned klezmer on the job as kind of a adult, fully formed musician, I'm gathering?
I was an adult, whether I'm fully formed or not is always up for debate, but we had a clarinet player when we first formed named Fred Jacobowitz. And so
Mm-hmm.
he helped me a lot, like with the expression, and I went to Klez camp a couple times.
Nice.
So yeah, I learned a lot about it from that source.
But then you've done like everything under the sun. I mean, you've played in rock bands. What was that band? Ladyfinger?
Yeah.
Tell me about that band real quick.
Well, that was like my first full-time professional band, and we started out as three women. Um, I sang a little bit of harmony and played fiddle, and I also played some electric bass when we
Wow.
started out. And Lois played guitar and sang. Gorgeous voice. Sharon Nat sang also very well and played piano. And then their goal was to be a full band. So eventually we added a drummer, Larry Taylor, and then we added a full-time bass player, John Previty. So that's
Mm.
when I stopped playing bass. But we worked for about 2 years, just one-nighters here and there, driving all over the place. And then I was at Club Stabils, which was a hardcore country and western bar. So that's where I learned country and western. And Chick Hall Jr. was in the band. So,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
some amazing guys in that band. Just Kurt Gibbons, who we had toured with, Niels Lofgren was in that band. So it was like incredible guys. And then after that, I played there for 3 years and then just realized I was a total burnout to be in a country and western bar 5 nights a week till 2 in the morning. I couldn't do it anymore.
Wait, you played 5 nights a week there?
Yeah, 5 nights a week for 3 years.
Those gigs don't exist anymore.
No, they do not. And
That's something else.
and then after that, I kind of drifted, and did odd things here and there. I filled in with cowboy jazz at one point when their fiddle player was drying out, and I filled in with different bands until gradually I started doing what I call my freelance career, which I played in a group that did concerts in schools during the day. I
Hmm.
would play gigs strolling, sometimes solo violin, sometimes with a guitar. I was in the club date scene, as they call it. I don't know if much of it exists anymore, but you get called to play with a flock of string players, all dressed up. And then I started playing. I played in rock bands and country bands.
And then you
Um,
also play mariachi music.
exactly. That
How
was
did
the
you end up
weirdest.
playing mariachi music?
Well, I always say there were two theories on that. One was a scheduling error in the ninth grade when I signed up for French and orchestra and they gave me Spanish and band. That was kind of foreshadowing. But I used to, especially when I wasn't working full time in any group, I'd look in the want ads and there was this Spanish folk group, Six Violinists. So I took the audition and it was a mariachi band. And evidently, there used to be one big mariachi band in DC. And as the Latino population expanded and people within the band feuded, they split into two bands. So they needed more violins in one of the bands. So I started playing mariachi from there. So that
Is it
was
hard to switch between all these different genres?
Well, yes and no. I mean, what I used to do was I'd be going from a mariachi gig or a church gig to a klezmer gig. And it's like the kind of scale you play from and the notes you choose and the expression is so different that I try to listen in the car as I'm driving to the next gig. I try to listen to something in that style. And of course, the outfits are different. So quite a few times I'm changing in my car as I'm driving, which is weird because a few times I've gotten my jacket so that it's like fastened around the seatbelt, so to speak, and then you have to take it back off to get out of the seatbelt. But other than that,
And then my favorite line in your bio. I mean, you've got a long bio. You've done so much impressive stuff. My favorite line is that you toured with Barry White.
oh yeah, oh
What's that?
baby,
You toured with Barry White? What?
yeah. Well, I used to be connected to somebody that would get the contracting jobs for a lot of the singers that came into town. So I got to play with Stevie Wonder once. I got to play with Dionne Warwick a couple of times, Aretha Franklin, but Barry White, that was actually my first union gig. I got to back up being Barry White. He liked to have a full string section. So I played that. And whenever he'd come to town, I'd get called. And then at one point he needed some strings to go on tour.
Hmm.
And the same person who had hired me the other times had lined up the string section. So we got to tour with Barry White, and we got to stay in like hotels, but the rest of the band all was staying in, they slept in the bus.
Wow.
But they were
Nice.
very nice people, and the girls were showing us some of the steps they would do, the girl singers.
Nice. Excellent. Excellent. Um, well, first, let me mention we've got a little more time with the fabulous, multi talented violinist Susan Jones, star of not one, but two sets for this year's Washington Jewish Music Festival, the virtual J by J, the Jazz Night set, and then the Kleztet with special guest Susan Jones. One set mostly jazz, one set mostly klezmer, although the lines certainly get blurry between the two of them. But if you are watching this interview live, and by live I mean if you look at your clock right now, it should say 5:35 p.m. if you're on the East Coast on Wednesday, December 9th. If you're watching this live, feel free to chime in with your own questions for Susan Jones. If you're watching this on Zoom, we're doing this in a Zoom webinar format, which means you want to use the Q&A feature. Hit that Q&A button on the little menu bar and you can type any questions you want. If you're watching on the Eventive platform, you can use their chat function and said questions will also get relayed to us. Well, Sue, another thing I haven't talked about yet, like I said, you've got numerous skill sets as a musician, but another one is as a jazz composer. You've written a lot of original music. In fact, I was a little disappointed. No, not a criticism, but only one of your compositions was featured in the Jazz Night set. An incredible, beautiful, almost kind of a smooth jazz tune called "Be Sure of Love." How did you become a composer? Because that's a completely different skill set, like I mentioned.
Well, I'm not sure, but every now and then a melody would come into my head. So I'd write it down. And at first, I was fairly clueless as to how to chord it because I didn't play a chordal instrument.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have a steady where a couple times a month I'd play at Kramer Books. They have a little cafe, and then they have live music a few nights a week. And I usually play with the guitar, sometimes guitar and bass or guitar and piano. But there I would usually the guitarist ended up helping me chord it because I'd try to write a chord progression and I'd play this sounds pretty behind this note and this sounds pretty behind that note, but it made absolutely no sense as a chord progression. So I started to study jazz piano, and then it kind of I was hearing things, but I know what I was hearing, and then I had a better understanding. But sometimes I'd jog and a melody would pop into my head. So I'd write it down, or I sometimes something would come to me in the night when I'm sleeping. I wake up in the night and pull out my violin and quietly write it down. And then sometimes I just have ideas how to finish the song, or I'd put ideas together. So that's really how it started. I was just getting ideas from Muse Central. Well, you're a composer. I mean, how did you start? It just things came to you?
Yeah, you just noodle around and you're like, oh, I like that. Am I stealing it from somewhere? If yes, start again. If no, write it down. But I really, you're a very good composer, and your recordings feature a lot of your own compositions. I think I was talking about these earlier. You've got a bunch of albums out, and they feature almost exclusively your tunes.
Yeah,
Violin
mostly.
Caliente, which has all this great Latin music, and then Exit 19 is, I think, your most recent album with original music.
Hmm.
And these can all be found on violindreams.com. Fantastic. Um, Look, I've been asking this next question of all my guests in these artist chats, and I know we're a little tired of talking about it and kind of grimace when we're asked this question, but I feel it's important to ask it anyhow. How are you doing? A meeting, 2020 has obviously thrown a lot of monkey wrenches at a lot of people. Everyone is facing challenges in their respective walks of life. But artists, performers have certainly had their own unique set of challenges this year. How has it affected you, and how have you been dealing with it?
Well, I've been dealing with it pretty well. I mean, uh, well, when you're a freelance musician, it helps if you can kind of put away a nest egg so that when something like this happens, you're not like out on the street. But and I was comfortable that way. I don't live real high on the hog, so it was not that wasn't so much of an issue, but I really missed performing. Um, I try to regularly every day for about an hour. I practice violin. I joined I'm reading a book in Spanish, which I get together with people. We read a chapter out loud once a week. So that takes an hour. I walk for about an hour. And if I have the motivation, I'll practice piano for an hour. And I pretty much spend the rest of the time washing my hands.
Excellent. Do you have any future musical plans?
Was in there. I'm not
2027?
uh 2027, yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I actually do have some gigs lined up for next year because a lot of the weddings they had to postpone them to next year.
Mm.
So they start up again in April. Now, whether the can will get kicked farther down the road, I don't know. But what I've done was I've over the last, I don't know, maybe 15 years, I started playing regular gigs like in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And some of them I've been playing in for a long time and I know the residents. And I felt so bad them being shut in, no visitors, no entertainers, no vendors. They can't even be together with each other. So I made a couple of recordings and sent them to the activity director to pass around from room to
Nice.
room. I did some stuff like that. I played little lawn concerts for some of the senior citizens in my neighborhood.
Didn't you? I saw you serenading someone out their window at Edenwald up in Towson.
Oh, well, yeah, now that was actually a paid gig, but that
Oh,
was
nice.
great. That was my first gig once after the shutdown. And that was so nice because they had hired me to play and I'm playing outside and everybody's listening from their balcony. So we're all distanced. It felt totally safe. And it was so refreshing to play for people again.
Mm.
But I've played a few outdoor weddings now that the weather is no longer amenable. I just figured, well, I'll go back into just practicing, and I'm trying to learn new tunes and increase my skill, even practicing scales and arpeggios and crap like
Wow,
that.
you're an inspiration. Well,
Yeah, but
look,
you haven't heard them, so it sounds pretty bad. But as I get higher and higher.
we've got just a few minutes left, so you've got a few minutes if you want to get in any final questions for Susan Jones, our guest today in this artist chat. But while we're waiting for any final questions, let me say a couple of things. First of all, big thanks to everyone who helped put together this virtual J by J festival. It's really an impressive achievement, and my hat is off to the organizations that are sponsoring this, most specifically the Edlovich DC Jewish Community Center, the Poses Jewish Community Center of Northern Virginia, and the Bender Jewish Community Center of Greater Washington. And of course, the fabulous J by J staff who have really stepped up to the plate to make this happen. I'm talking about Ilya Tobis, Alexis Rodriguez, and Corrine Williams. And with any luck, there's going to be at least some form of in-person outdoor J by J this coming May 2021. Now, again, what you need to do to see some of the fabulous music we've been talking about is go to jbyj.org. That's jbyjdc.org. That's jxjdc.org. And here you'll find information on the entire festival. And like I said, it's over 40 movies, about a dozen unique musical performances, talks, artist talks like this one, all sorts of stuff. And there's lots of ways to fest, as we say. You can, for $90, no additional fees, not like Ticketmaster where you pay $90 and it turns out to be $123. No, for just $90, you can get an all access pass that gets you unlimited access to all the movies, all the concerts, all the talks until the end of the festival, which is 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. So you've got like some 36 hours with which to fill with cultural entertainment you can't get anywhere else. Or you can take more of an a la carte approach and purchase individual movies, individual concerts. It's pay what you want with just a minimal service charge. That's a pretty good deal. Now, obviously, I've been focusing on the music component of J by J, the Washington Jewish Music Festival, thanks to the Howard and Geraldine Pollinger Family Foundation for being this year's lead sponsor of the festival. And the sets we've been talking about today are the Jazz Night at J by J Festival. Don't let the title fool you. You can watch this at any time. I watched it at 9 a.m. And this set consists of Susan Jones, who we've been talking to on violin, Michael Reitzik on guitar, Harry Appelman on piano, Bob Abbott, who doesn't look like that, on bass, and Julian Berkowitz, who doesn't look like that on drums. And then the other set we've been talking about is the Kleztet, with special guest Susan Jones, consisting of Susan, Sean Lane on piano, Bob Abbott on bass, and Tim Jarvis, not pictured on drums. So go to that website the minute we're done, jxjdc.org, and check out some of these offerings. Someone chimes in. Donna Rubin says they love to listen to Nuts and Bolts. Nuts and Bolts is the CD that Susan and I did together. God, what year was it? Like 2002, 2003, something like that?
I think it was something like 2002.
And then Donna also says, and I'm assuming this is a typo, she says she also enjoys listening to Violence Caliente. I'm assuming that's Violin Caliente, which is Susan's Latin jazz album.
Hi, Donna.
Another fantastic record and a great way that Susan blends some of her diverse musical experiences. Well, look, Susan, I really enjoyed chatting with you today. I hope to play with you in person before too long.
I hope so too.
If people want to learn more about you, learn about your music, best place to go is violindreams.com. Is that right?
Correct. Violin like the instrument, not violence. Yes.
Right. Violindreams.com. And that contains information on your whereabouts and your albums and all that stuff. Is there anything else you want to say to the good folks watching either now or in the replay of this interview?
Well, I'll think of it later, I'm sure. But
thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, you've got, like I said, about 36 hours left to check out all the incredible offerings of this year's J by J. Do so. I promise you will be richly rewarded for doing so, in a spiritual sense, not financially. Thank you very much. So long.
Bye-bye. Thank you.